We're going to look at 5 different ways of entering coordinates in AutoCAD. And those 5 ways or methods are the dynamic input method, the polar tracking method, the polar method, the relative method, and the absolute method. And we're going to use those 5 methods to draw the same line 5 times. I'll begin with the absolute method by going into the line command, L, enter. The first point is 5, 2, and that's relative to the absolute origin of 0, 0. The second point is 8, 6, and I'll hit enter to exit the line command. The second method is the relative method, and here I will go back into the line command in the same way, L, enter, 5, 2, but this time I'll use the @ symbol, which is on the 2 key on the keyboard. Shift 2 key gives me the @ symbol, and that lets AutoCAD know that the coordinate that I'm going to enter is relative to the first point of 5, 2. I'll enter 3, 4 because that's the distance in the x and y directions relative to the first point that I want my second point to be drawn. When I hit enter, the line is drawn. You can see it in yellow there, and I'll hit enter to exit the line command. The third method is the polar method. And when we hear polar, we should think of degrees. 0 to 360 degrees makes a circle. And we should also think of angles. I begin in the same way, L, enter to get into the line command. 5, 2 is the identical first point. And then I enter the @ symbol again, followed by the distance, the angle symbol, and the angle that I want in degrees. In this case, the distance is 5. That's the length of the line. The angle symbol is on the comma key on the keyboard. Shift, comma, gives me the angle symbol, which looks like a greater than sign. And finally, the angle in degrees, without any degree symbol required. In my case, it's 53 degrees, so I enter 53, enter. You can see the polar line in red. I'll hit enter again to exit. And I'm ready for my fourth method, which is the polar tracking method. To use the polar tracking method, I need to have polar tracking on at the status bar. And right now I have polar tracking off. I also have dynamic input off. And that's important because if dynamic input is on, none of the 3 previous methods will work properly. Polar tracking is on the status bar, the 5th button from the left. I'll turn it on, then I'll go back into the line command, L, enter. The first point is the same, 5, 2, but with polar tracking I can lock on to different angle increments. Currently it's locking on to 0 degrees, and if I move up and around it'll lock on to 90 degrees and 270 or 180 and then 270. I can set the increment angle by going back to the polar tracking button on the status bar and right-clicking. And from the pop-up, choosing Settings, and then I can add an increment angle here. So I'll click Additional Angle, I'll say New, and I'll type in 53 for my new increment angle, and then I'll say OK. Now when I rubber band around here and I move up towards 53 degrees, watch what happens. It locks on to 53 degrees, and I can simply enter the distance, which is 5. 5, enter. And I've completed that line using the polar tracking method. Finally, we have the dynamic input method represented in green. And to use the dynamic input method, I need to turn on dynamic input at the status bar. I'll turn polar tracking off, and then I'll turn dynamic input on. It's also the F12 key on the keyboard. With dynamic input on, when I go into the line command, I immediately get entry prompts at the crosshairs. It's asking for the first point. Here again I can enter 5, and then I can use the tab key to enter the second point of 2. I'll hit enter, and it prompts me for a distance and an angle related to the second point. The distance again is 5. I'll hit the tab key, and the angular measurement is highlighted, which is prompting me to enter the value in degrees. I'll enter 53, enter, and it immediately finishes my line used with the dynamic input method.